This is Conversations
with Ronnie, Keith,
and Iris. This is Conversations with
Ronnie, Keith,
and Iris. I know you guys haven't heard us in quite some time together.
It's been a minute.
You did your episode solo. I did my episode
We've been
solo.
venturing off to new things.
Yes, so we really want to thank you guys for all of the support. You guys have been amazing. We actually had some fan mail come in regarding your episode with Andrea.
Yes,
Andrea. Whatever. Andrea Perryman. The episode that you had there on episode 48, which was about her fight for thyroid eye disease awareness, TED. Mm-hmm. And someone wrote in and said to you, I just love to hear Iris's voice on the show. Great episode. Keep it going.
Oh, that's so nice.
And so that person, thank you. You didn't say anything about my episode last week, but
don't be a hater. This is woman power.
That came from Florida. I do want to quickly give a couple of shout outs real quick before we get started. We have a very special episode today.
We do.
And a very special guest. But before we bring the guest on, I want to quickly give a quick couple of thank yous to the cities, the countries and territories that have been downloading Conversations with Ronnie, Keith, and Iris, especially the last couple of episodes. We've had some downloads coming from Germany,
nice,
Canada, United Kingdom, Philippines, and of course, United States. In particular, Henderson, Nevada, Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm not going to go through all the cities. Mannheim, Baden-Württemberg.
Oh, that's a big tongue twister there.
That's in Germany, I think. Chagrin Falls, Ohio. Raymond, Alberta, Canada. Largo, Florida. Yorktown Heights, New York. San Antonio, Texas. Liverpool.
Wow.
Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Shout out, yeah.
This is a new one here. Wauwatosa, Wisconsin.
Oh wow.
Of course, Orlando, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, and just a plethora of cities that have been.
And even Canada, that's new for us. That's the first time. Canada, thank you so much for your love and support. And Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, we had 39 different cities download us in the last two episodes.
Oh my goodness.
Now, there's multiple downloads per city, but 39 different cities across the world. So we thank you.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you so much. And keep the fan mail going.
Yes.
Tell us what you like, what you didn't like. Just send it to us. We love fan mail.
Absolutely. Really, really appreciate that.
So today's conversation is really deep for many of us, especially women. We're going to get transparent. We're going to get real here. We're going to talk about friendships. And I'm not talking about brunch dates or birthday calls. We're going to dive deep. We're talking we're going to explore what happens with those female friendships, the ones that, at a moment in our time kind of held us up, but then they start to fall apart. So I'm super excited about this guest today, who is someone who has spent her career just studying the complexities of women's life. And you are also a gender studies expert, even a longtime college professor, and the author of dozen acclaimed nonfiction books. And you've written everything from mother to daughter dynamics to marriage, secrets, ambition. But her latest book, Estranged, How Strained Female Friendships Are Mended or Ended. It's going to definitely dive into the emotional truth behind why so many friendships just fall apart. And what can you learn from it? Without further ado, please extend this warm welcome. I would like to welcome Ms. Susan Shapiro Barash to the show. Welcome.
Hi.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. I feel like I'm going to do a lot of listening today.
Yes, I always say that my books, or if men would read my books, it would be like a cheat sheet for them.
Yes.
Yes. I've been taking notes. Thank you so much for joining us, Susan. We really appreciate it.
Oh, so glad to be here and so glad to talk about this. Is my latest book. It is actually my 18th book.
Oh,
Oh,
And
wow.
it
wow.
is my 14th nonfiction book, but I write dramatic women's fiction under my pen name, Susanna Marin. So I've done
Yes.
4 books that way.
Oh my God, that's just awesome to know, Susan. It's just very inspiring. And tell us like a little bit about you, about yourself, and what made you just start writing. And you also are a college professor. We want to know everything about you from beginning to end. Just talk to us.
Well, I have always wanted to write. When I was like 6 years old, I wrote a family newspaper and tried to sell it to my father and my uncle, who wanted me to charge less. So I knew even then that, it was harder to be female and to have some ambition than to be male in a patriarchal culture. And really, my life's work has been about how women are positioned in contemporary American society and the faces we wear versus how we really feel about things.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. And just to delve in a little bit deeper into that, you started writing. You are currently a college professor. Tell us a little bit about that and how did you start writing, or when did you start writing your first book?
Well, I actually have not been teaching at Marymount Manhattan after 24 years of being in the writing department there because during COVID, I stopped teaching, and for the first time in many many years, I'm a full-time writer. But when I
Mm,
was teaching there, and I really loved it, and I had terrific students, I was teaching in the writing department, but my topic was gender. So we were really looking at male and female prescribed behavior and how it plays out for us and what our choices are. So for me personally, every nonfiction book I've written, I always wanted to see in a bookstore. For example, when I was 23 years old and I was getting married, I wanted to find a book on mothers in law and daughters in law because I clearly needed it.
mhm.
And there was none. And so many
Wow.
years later, when I had 3 children, I decided to do that study. And so that was a very interesting book for me personally, but also a book that I thought should be in the bookstores for women. And for each of my nonfiction books, I interview a very diverse group of women in terms of age, race, ethnicity, level of education, religion, earning power from big cities, small towns, rural areas, suburbs, all across the country to see how they feel. So I've written 3 studies on the role of wifing, of being a wife in America. I've written a book on mothers and daughters, as I said, mothers in law and daughters in law, sisters, toxic friends, female rivalry called Tripping the Prom Queen. So, always looking for how women navigate a path.
Wow, that's amazing. Very good to hear that. I wonder, so diving into what you said there, of course, COVID always puts a stop to things, but you've continued on with your writing. That hasn't stopped. Um, when you started writing, over time, as you said, you've done the research. You've interviewed several different women from all walks of life, which is great. So that way you can have input from everyone. When you're writing your nonfiction books compared to your fiction books, do you find it to be a little bit more daunting of a task because of the research that you have to do, or are they kind of on the same level playing field?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really love both forms, but they're so different. I mean, it's really apples and oranges. When I'm writing a nonfiction book, I have a stack of studies I've printed out because I do a lot of research. I
Mhm.
have a stack of interviews because, as I said, I'm interviewing 150 to 200 women. Plus, I do a questionnaire at the end of the book in many of the books. So I really have a lot of stuff on my desk. And then I also have books that I'm looking at. And then
Mhm.
I'm looking at pop culture So I have my desktop to write at, and then to the left, I have my iPad to research. So I'm looking at pop culture in the sense of, like for this book, for Estranged, I'm looking at famous female feuds, where we read about it in People magazine and the other
Mm-hmm.
tabloids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at serious research on what female bonding means to women, why we invest emotionally to a much greater extent than men for sure, but also then we realize when these friendships are broken. So 7 years ago, my mother died, and it was a very, very sad time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed what friends surprised me by being so available and so understanding and sympathetic, and what very close friends surprised me by not being that, when I had just
Mm.
automatically expected it. So I said to my publisher and my editor and my agent that I wanted to write a book on female estrangement, and why. And as you said earlier, these are not just the friend do
You love
Pilates.
here.
This is not about the friend in the gym. You like the same Pilates class. This is about a friendship that is so deep and so trusting that you really confide your feelings and you keep each other's secrets. So, loyalty is very much at the center of these friendships. So I wanted to write this book, and they said, well, you have three novels due first. So I wrote my novels, my Palm Beach novels, and delivered them, and they came out. And then 2.5 years ago, when I went back to this research, everything had changed. And that was what was so striking. So maybe COVID had changed it. Maybe the Me Too movement, maybe women are more honest with themselves every year, that we're really waking up. But instead of saying, yes, I needed to leave this friendship, it was a terrible situation for me, but I feel terrible about it. I'm ashamed that I failed. I feel like I'm really a loser for having to break up with this friend. Women are saying, you know what? Life is short. We've been through a
Yes.
lot. I now look at this friend and realize that it's not what it was. She is not who she was. The friendship is not what it was. And I feel very empowered leaving it. So that was a big switch.
And I love that you mentioned the Me Too movement at that time, COVID, and again, the loss of your mother, and I'm sorry for your loss. And I love it how it inspired you to write this book. And do you think that the topic just resonates more deeply now to others, that with your experiences and all of that, do you often see that with other people when they've read the book or could resonate with that?
I think that women of all ages, that's another thing when I said a diverse group. I mean, women between 20 and 80 were my interviewee
Contributed
pool.
to the book.
And women really, get to reinvent themselves along the way. And longevity being what it is for women, we really get to have lots of different experiences. But women really want to mirror each other as closest friends. So, whatever phase or stage of life you're at, you're with friends who are experiencing a similar thing. For example, um, young women spoke of a breakup because they were both working, just out of school, college, very happy, single women in the city. One gets married. That's kind of a tension between them because they're no longer sort of twinning. Then she has a baby. Then she moves to the suburbs, has another baby. And the woman who's single in the city says, you know what? She doesn't have time for me. But the woman who has two little kids and now lives, out of the city and isn't working, maybe says, and how about if she is working? Then it's even harder. How does she expect me to still have the kind of time I used to have? So they're no longer reflecting each other's needs or sating each other's needs. That's one example. Another example is, women are 42 and they're divorced. Two of them are divorced, and
Mm-hmm.
the other three in this group, women love groups, love to be in a group, are still married. And there's all this tension because the ones who are divorced don't really relate to the married life anymore. And those who are married don't want to relate to what it's like to be a divorcee. So again, a schism. So there's one aspect to friendships ending because people have changed. Someone in the dyad, one of the two friends has changed. Another thing that happens is there's tremendous betrayal. So one
Yes.
friend, I said, I mentioned trust. I said, trust is at such a high bar for women. And then, one friend really betrays the other. An example would be best friends at work, just best friends. They go out for drinks and they talk about this new idea. And one of the friends says, I am pitching this at the meeting on Thursday. I have this great idea. And lo and behold, her friend pitches it instead as if it's her idea. Quite a betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Women of all ages reported that their friends had seduced their husband or partner or boyfriend. Major, major betrayal. So they're really different ways that the friendships break up. Either there's this incendiary incident, like the breakup is because your friend slept with your husband. I mean, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Or it's more cumulative. This friend doesn't respect you. She doesn't really put you first. Another big issue is money. Now someone has money in the dyad. One of you has a lot more money than the other, and that causes great tension.
Mm. Now, I know I said I would play the silent, but I have to
Come
ask this
on,
question.
no, this is girl time.
So in these groups, the diet that you guys have, right, for women, you reference schism, right? And tell me if I'm out of place here. Is it deeply rooted in jealousy? Because you were saying how,
Oh, I
you
hate that
know,
word.
yeah, but
I
here we
hate
go.
that.
So, like you were saying, Susan, you said that you're looking at some women that may be in their 40s and may be divorced, and then some that are married. And so that may cause tension because there's two that are married, the other two are not divorced, or even what you just said, a change in finances. Is that is there a possibility that it may be rooted in jealousy? And another reason why I asked that, because I'm 40 plus and I have a few friends that were in that circle. There's some that are not married. There's some that are divorced, or possibly going through a divorce and things like that. And some of us that are married. And I haven't, as a man, we haven't experienced that. There's been, people that have grown in financial, they've occurred financial growth, and there's never been that sense of that. And so I just kind of want to see if that is there anything deep seated with jealousy with it between women once they hit a certain plateau in life.
Jealousy is a big part of it. In fact, one of the chapters is called The Green-Eyed Friend. And years ago, I did a whole study on female rivalry, jealousy, envy, and competition, the three forms of rivalry for women. And jealousy is partly a person's nature to different degrees. A person could be more or less jealous than her friends. And then it's also really taught to us by the culture. So think about it, for anyone who read Archie comics, Veronica
My
Oh
and
yeah.
favorite. That was my
Betty
favorite.
were always jealous of each other.
Yes.
Yes.
Anyone who ever saw Heathers, the movie from years ago, where um, it's Winona Ryder's character who poisons her best friend, and then
Yeah.
I think Christian Slater is the boyfriend and says to her, "You just," I'm paraphrasing, "you just killed your best friend," and she says, "Best friend and worst enemy." So we're taught this. We're taught this by fairy tales. Poor Cinderella, so she couldn't help it that she was prettier and smarter, gets stuck in the kitchen, right? So that those wicked stepsisters who are so competitive and so jealous can get the prince, which of course they don't. And what about Snow White? Like, so even today, these fairy tales are read to little girls, and they were read to us. And so we're taught in our culture that women are set up to compete only with each other in a situation of limited goods. There's jealousy partly by nature, like I said, some people are more jealous than others. And then there's a societal prescription that we are competing for the glittering goods and that it's not enough pie. So
Mm.
it definitely feeds into the friendship. And when friends are like mirroring, as I said, and they're on an even keel, everything's fine. But if one friend really becomes a rock star in her
Please
career, in her
go
personal
into the
life, there
book.
can be a lot of jealousy for the
It's
friend who
from the book
feels
that we
left
have studied.
behind.
And thank you so much for mentioning that, Susan. And you had mentioned the green eyed friend, but you also mentioned, I hope I'm saying this right, the thieving friend. Am I saying that right? Or the thieving friend?
The
And
thieving friend.
yes, and some of those just hit very close to home. And can you talk about that thieving friend and how women can recognize those red flags early, and maybe even perhaps help us elaborate here further, and like what keeps us stuck in friendships that no longer serve us?
Well, why do we stay so long? That's a really, salient question. And women often make excuses for why they're still with the friend. They say, "Oh, we grew up together. Oh, our mothers were friends. Oh, we were at the same church. We grew up that way too."
Hmm.
It's not just that we were neighbors, but that we
You're
belonged to the same
correct.
congregation. We went to school together. We were roommates when we got out of grad school. All these different reasons. And also, beyond that, we've been taught to be best friends forever. And that's really a myth. And the idea that these friendships have an expiration point is absolutely right, and that we do change and we aren't always in sync anymore. I mean, to that point though, 75% of the women said they felt more obligated to stay with a female friend than to stay with a husband or a partner.
Wow. And that makes a lot of perfect sense because we've seen that a lot. Like, I have a friend, oh, yeah, she was my middle school buddy. That's why we're still friends. I'm like, really?
Exactly right. Like there are
One of
all
them is
these.
married and one of them is single. So that doesn't even clash very good. I don't
And,
know.
and then, the other side of that is, so, what would I do without my female friends? The other side is, can you believe she did that to me?
Mm,
So there's a lot that goes into these friendships. We also hold the bar very high. We expect these friends to really be there for us when they have their own complicated lives. So that's another problem for the friendships when they fail. But what's really trending now, based on my research, is the estrangement, meaning
mm-hmm.
we feel okay leaving. We're not second guessing ourselves as much. We're saying, you know what? This doesn't work anymore. And I can leave and do better at the other side of it. And I can now open myself up to healthier friendships.
So, is that what inspired your book? I know you talked about, when your mother passed away, and again, our condolences, but it just had you take a second look at your friendships that you had, that, the non-responses, the non-condolences or prayers or reach outs for what happened to you. Did that kind of inspire you for this book?
I was inspired by this book because of my ongoing quest to understand what the price of being the good girl is. We have
Mm.
been
Mm.
Oh, that's
taught
deep.
to
That's
be the
deep.
good girl and the pleaser, the dutiful daughter, the
Mm.
dutiful wife, if we so choose, the dutiful mother, if we so choose. The trajectory of the female life has been good girl, good girl, good girl. What could be more damning than to be a bad friend? What could be more damning than to be a bad mother? To fail at a marriage. Although I will say that our culture understands divorce much more than we understand a breakup between best female friends. There's no couples therapy for female friendship. There is when there's a divorce or a breakup of a long-standing monogamous relationship. So, love relationships, we give tacit approval to the idea that they can end. But female friendships, good girls stay best friends forever, no matter what. And it just isn't true. So, what I'm seeing is women who really say, I've hit the expiration date here.
Like, it's more like, I'm 40 years old, Susan, and I just wanted to tell you that. And I love that you said that, because estrangement, yes. And I'm to the point in my life now, okay, if you don't want to be my friend, okay, I basically rub my hands, move on, and continue on. Like, I'm okay being alone. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. And I like that you said that. And my husband's always like, well, a girl should always have a good friend, right? Like, you should never want to be alone. There's
Right.
something about getting together with friends and having a girl day or a brunch day, like I mentioned. But I'm to the point in my life right now. I keep telling him I am okay being alone. I'm okay with, hey, if we had an altercation or a disagreement, I'm not going to sit there and linger around that too long, because I have things to do in my life. Like, I have more things to worry about. Do you see that happening also with you, and with, perhaps with other females that you've interviewed or talked with?
I see it both ways. Women are strong enough to leave an unhealthy friendship and to not seek out unhealthy friends, just to belong, just to not be alone, as you say. But I also see a real yearning for inclusion. Women like groups, women like to be a
We
part of
do.
something and to belong. So many women who have estranged say that it was doubly hard because they're part of the same group of friends and they feel like they might jeopardize their position. So I think it's both strength, a personal strength that says to us exactly what you said. I don't need to be here. This isn't really what I want. It's not good for me, and I can be alone, especially in what we're calling a loneliness epidemic in America, right?
Yeah.
So to be able to not spend time or engage with people who really aren't healthy for us, friends, where it's not healthy, is absolutely freeing. However, why are we still friends with these people, and what kind of damage occurs because they take up our time and energy in many cases?
And that takes me to my next question then. So, how do we pick up those pieces and choose to walk away from a toxic friendship that, we don't know what that healthy closure looks like, but how do you do that? And is it possible to rebuild like a fractured friendship when something bad happens? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, based on my research, not too many women get a second chance or look for a second chance
You're a
with
phenomenal.
a really, as you say, fractured
Down a
friendship.
little.
So there's really been a breakup. And in the book,
You
I was able to
you
get
could
per chapter
that
a
sorry.
very
Oh, I know. I got it. Don't
long.
worry. Don't worry.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Susan. I'm here. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, no,
You can
I was just
continue.
saying that in the book, I was able to get one interview per chapter, which gives both sides of the breakup. Like a
Mm,
she said, where both the French who has estranged, so she's the estranger, and she breaks up, and the estrangee, the one who is at the receiving end of the breakup. So I interviewed both sides, and in I don't want to give away the book, but in one
absolutely.
case, they were able to reconcile, but really walking on eggshells, being very careful with each other. And in another story, one wanted a second chance, and the other said, absolutely not. What we had
Mm.
was great, but the breakup was the breakup, and there's no going back. Just to give you, you know, some some examples of how women feel, but the idea of no longer being in a friendship that makes you anxious and takes its toll on your mental health, where you once felt so comfortable and now you feel so uneasy, that's really progress for women, because we're getting stronger. We wouldn't be able to leave those friendships.
That's very true. And I feel like I've been there many times. I'm going to be transparent, even for our listeners, that we have had a friendship breakup. It's like a relationship breakup, like you have a boyfriend and girlfriend. It literally feels the same way. When you stop talking to a friend, it's like you're grieving that friend. Or it's amazing how that it's very similar to a relationship with a man or woman or whatever your partner. It's very similar. And based on your opinion, Susan, what is it that makes female friendships different than male friendships? Because my husband right now, he talks to two, was it three? Three high school friends for years, right? You've been, how many years you guys been friends?
Oh, it's been about 20, no, yeah, 27, 28 years, I think.
Like they still talk to this day. Like they have been through marriage, single life, everything together. But then me, I don't even talk to any of my childhood friends. I could count my friends probably with one hand, if I should say, to be honest with you. But I don't talk to my high school friends at all. We simply drifted apart. So in your opinion, what makes us different than male friendships?
Well, first of all, drifting apart or just growing apart is not quite the same as a breakup. It's like it's losing touch
Okay.
and not being in contact. But if you were to get back in contact, would you be happy? Would you be warm toward those women?
Yes, I would for
Okay,
sure.
so that's not an estrangement. That's really just a sort
Mm.
of life gets in the way. For men, although I confess I've for all these books I've never on thousands in the aggregate, thousands of interviews with women, I've never spoken to a man directly about how he feels about anything. So,
Well,
so
I'm
the
here.
only
He still talks to
the
his boys.
the only way I can report about men is as the women I interview report about the men in their lives.
Mm,
And that's how I did my 3 studies on on the role of
mhm.
wife. One book is called The New Wife, the evolving role of the American wife, and I did a whole study on the phases of marriage, the 9 phases of marriage, how to make it, break it, keep it, and then one on remarriage called Second Wives. So looking at these, you know, experiences of men, I'm really only listening to how the women view it. But I will
Wonderful.
say for women that a big breakup, whether you end up having a shouting match, which is with your best friend, which is very unusual. Based on my research, women really don't want to have a conflict or a confrontation. There's a lot of ghosting that goes on.
Yeah.
So, or a slow fade. So, women really who have a breakup, even if it's a ghost, it results in ghosting, they're really moving away from the friend, which is very different from losing touch with the friend.
That's wonderful. So, you said that about the the men part, right? And my wife here, she kind of mentioned that earlier. With the again estrangement, your book, right? You talk about these things. As a
Yes.
man, it's for me, it's disheartening, right? Because I just want to. So I'm a brag, and this isn't me just blowing smoke because she's here. My wife is a very, very sweet and nice person. And so there's been times where she's had friends that, life happens. They grew apart because, someone moved somewhere, she moved somewhere. So it's been a time where there's been many years where she didn't talk to a friend. And then all of a sudden, a friend
Yeah.
pops out of nowhere. But they have ulterior motives like, hey, I need help with my resume. I know, where do you work? Again, can
Right.
you help me with my resume? And so my wife gets very excited because she's reconnecting with a friend that she hasn't spoken to since childhood. And then so she's working with the friend. Oh, yeah, let me help you. Boom, the friend gets a job at the same company. And that's the end of it for the friend, for the estranged
It's
friend.
like they got what they needed and they ghosted you.
Right. And so my heart hurts because as a man, I don't, as far as my friendships go, we really don't deal with things like that.
Uh-huh.
Or you have a friend that's been having an affair.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
happened to me. Was
yeah,
Right.
having an affair with my son's father for years behind my back.
yeah. So, you know,
That's very bad.
Yeah,
Well,
trust
here's
me.
the thing. A friend who is really using you and then kind of discards you is clearly someone to leave. We don't have to equivocate about that. I mean, that one is just, red flag and obvious. And
mhm,
women spoke a lot about the hierarchy of their friends and not feeling like an equal, like the friend is a taker, or she is with you, but only when she's not with her really important friends, or she aspires to friends who are wealthier or more popular, but you'll do for certain things. All of this is really painful stuff. And it really does happen. And it really is, of course, damaging.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
have to be smart enough to leave those friends. And it depends on your threshold for someone who just sort of can see you when, no one better is around. But most
mhm,
women in my study who fell into that category really had drawn a line in the sand. They didn't want any more of it.
understood, understood. Well, thank you for answering that. So, what I want to ask you here as well, Susan, and I know, thank you again for taking the time with us, and I don't want to, take too much more of your time.
Yeah.
With your book, how long would you say it's strange how strange female friendships are mended or ended? How long did it take for you to bring this book to fruition? How long did it take for you to get your studies done for this book and have this, published for you?
So, like I said, I started it 7 years ago. I interviewed 25 women. I pitched it to my publisher, and
Before those
and
Yeah.
novels.
She had to write the novels first,
Yes,
remember.
yes,
He was
yes.
like, no way,
right,
Jose. Hold
and
on.
and then I needed to. So then, when I got back to it after I wrote the other books, the three novels, I would call that really the beginning, because
Okay,
I had, well, not the beginning, but the meat of it,
okay,
because now I went and you know recruited 125 more interviews, and then at the back of the book I have a questionnaire and that's 111 women to be precise. So that started 2.5 years ago, and then all the research. I looked at a lot of studies on female friendship. I looked at a lot of sort of psychological treatises, stuff that's in Psychology Today. Looked at what happens over time with celebrity women. For example, Marilyn Monroe was very, very close with Ella Fitzgerald. But what got between these two friends was Marilyn Monroe's drinking and drugs.
Yes.
And I have a whole chapter on that, on being with a friend who has an addiction. And what do we do with that? When are we the enabler and when can we do no more? And it's just a question of our own self preservation. I looked at, oh, I forgot to say, I have in each chapter, I also have one sister story, because so many of the women whom I interviewed said, oh, people used to think we were sisters, or people thought we were like sisters, or it felt like we were sisters. We were so close. And I had written a book on sisters called Sisters Devoted or Divided. So in that study, women said, I no longer talk to the ones who were divided, no longer talk to their sisters. They said, I'm always looking for the closest female friend to replace my sister, my sister
Oh,
friend, sister relationship.
yeah.
So I looked at all of that, and I looked at, so for example, a really famous sister dyad would be Jackie Kennedy and her sister Lee Radswell. We talked about jealousy and thieving a little while ago. Well, they always appeared to be devoted sisters, but in fact, Jackie Kennedy was widowed and snapped up Aristotle Onassis, who was really supposed to marry her sister. So that's definitely a rivalry. And yet they were very famous, so they always had to look like they were happy together. But that was
Yeah.
pretty bad. So and then all of what we read about with, the Hilton sisters and
The Kardashians now.
the
I mean,
Kardashians,
they're
right? For
crazy.
sure.
They're crazy. And I like it that you brought that up because that relationship right there with Jackie Kennedy reminds me of the relationship that Queen Elizabeth II, bless her heart, had with Margaret, her sister. They seemed to be close, but I mean, I'm only going based off the show, The Crown. They had a lot of issues. There's a lot of rivalry in there.
Exactly. And a lot of envy and jealousy. And
Yes.
so I look at all of that. So long answer to your short question. This took me a full 2 years, maybe 2 years and a couple months to deliver to the publisher and, get it finished.
Wonderful. Appreciate that.
Is there one thing that you hope that your listeners just walk away after reading your Estranged book? Like, what's the one thing you wish they could get out of it once they're done reading it?
That it's okay to estrange and that you don't have to worry about being judged anymore, that this is actually an empowering step when the friendship is harmful to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Susan. Um, Thank you so much, Susan. We really appreciate you taking the time out, coming on to Conversations with Ronnie Keith and Iris to discuss your book and just how you got to where you are. We're really appreciative of that. I do want to, tell our audience, please check out Susan. You can check her out on her website, Susan Shapiro Barash, and that's spelled SUSAPIRO BARASH.com. She has her own website. You can go on there. Right now, Susan, you're in the middle of a book tour, correct?
True, I am.
So you've gone a couple of places. It's more of a
Nice.
Florida and Eastern tour that you have going on as we record this. You've been through Florida, which we're located in, Connecticut. You've also been in New York as well. And can you tell the listeners how long that this book tour will be going on? And I know that you'll be hitting most of the East Coast there from Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. How long will this go on for?
It'll go on for through the summer, and then in the fall, I actually go back to Florida, and
Ah,
yeah, and I'll be in South Florida, and I'm doing a few events there, and then it'll be more sporadic. But it has been really a very good tour. I was on Good Day New York and NDT TV, and Montel Williams interviewed me on his podcast.
oh,
So
wow.
Oh,
it's been great.
nice.
I've done, several bookstores, and libraries are definitely a mainstay.
Wonderful. And like I said, please follow her. She's on, you are on social media, you're on
Yes.
Instagram. And like I said, her website, it gives you all of the information about her books, her book tour. You even did a virtual book tour, which I've never heard of before. And that's pretty
Right. I
That
cool.
is
do I do
cool.
some stuff virtually. And if anyone's interested, they can always, just join in a virtual event wherever I
Thank
am, wherever it
Thank you
is.
so much for that, Susan. I'm excited. I'm gonna go over there and see you in person. Say, hey, this is Iris. Remember me? I know you've been through many podcasts, but I just overall, Susan, I want to thank you so much for being part of the conversation today because I really think that so many women listening needed to hear that we're pretty much not alone. There's a girl out there, or a woman out there that are going through the same issues, whether they're grieving a friend, missing one, or finally learning to protect their peace. This has been so insightful for sure. So I really appreciate you for giving us an insight, and we look forward to catching your book. So thank you so much for this.
And thank you for spending the time with me.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Conversations with
Ronnie Key
and Iris.